You are lying on your back. The sky is the only thing you can see. Someone you trust is kneeling over your head, and in their hand is a sharpened piece of stone. There is no medicine to put you under. Maybe a numbing paste made from plants. Maybe nothing at all. You feel pressure on your scalp, then scraping, right against the bone of your own skull. You are not being punished. You are not a prisoner. The person doing this to you is trying to save your life, and you agreed to let them try. This happened, not once, not by accident, but thousands of times. Thousands of years before anyone had a scalpel or soap or the first idea of what a germ was. And the strangest part isn't that people did this to each other, it's how many of them lived through it and what that tells us about how far back real medicine actually goes. Let's start with how old this practice really is. Trepanation, cutting or scraping a hole into a living human skull, shows up in the archaeological record as far back as the Neolithic period, roughly 6,500 to 5,000 BCE, across parts of Europe. That's before writing, before the wheel, in most of the world. The person who first took this seriously as a subject of science was the French surgeon and anatomist Paul Broca in the 1860s and 70s. Broca examined ancient trepanned skulls and compared specimens from Europe with ones found in Peru, and he was the one who pushed back on the idea that these were just wounds. He argued they were deliberate surgery. That survivor count, the tally we're going to keep building through this whole video. Right now, it starts in the single digits of documented cases from Broca's own research alone. Here's how we actually know people survived this, and it isn't guesswork. Bone heals in a very specific way. When you cut into living bone and the person lives, the edges of that wound round off and smooth over as new bone grows in over the following weeks and months. Skulls with sharp, unhealed edges tell you the person died during or shortly after the procedure. Skulls with smooth, rounded edges tell you they didn't. They walked around afterward, some of them for years. This distinction is basic to how bioarchaeologists read these skulls today, and it's the reason we can say with confidence that this wasn't just ritual mutilation, it was surgery with real outcomes, some good, some not, exactly like surgery today. Nowhere on Earth has more evidence of this than the Andes. The bioarchaeologist John Verano at Tulane University has spent decades studying trepanned skulls from Peru, and his documented sample is enormous. Over 1,500 trepanned skulls from ancient Peru alone, spanning more than 1,000 years of practice among different cultures in the region. That's not a handful of curious cases. That is the largest known body of evidence for skull surgery anywhere in the ancient world, all from one region. Verano published this research in detail in his 2016 book, Holes in the Head: The Art and Archaeology of Trepanation in Ancient Peru. Survivor count just jumped from single digits to well over 1,000. Here's where it gets stranger. Some of these skulls don't just show one healed trepanation, they show more than one, done at different times, in different places on the same skull, each one healed independently before the next was performed. That means a single person went through this surgery, survived it, healed, and then went through it again. Not as a one-time desperate measure, but as something they came back for. Think about what that means. Someone who had already felt exactly what this procedure involved chose, or was chosen, to go through it a second time and live to show it in their bones. This is the single biggest wait really fact in this whole video, and it's not speculation. It's written directly into the skeletal record Verano and other researchers have studied. We don't have a confirmed exact number for the highest count on one individual skull. And rather than guess at a headline number, what matters is that repeat healed trepanation on the same person is a documented pattern, not a one-off oddity. And here's where it gets stranger again. This wasn't a fixed, unchanging technique that stayed the same for thousands of years. The evidence out of Peru shows the practice being refined over time, with later periods showing better healing outcomes than earlier ones, based on comparing bone regrowth across different chronological groups in the archaeological record. That's not superstition repeating itself blindly, generation after generation. That's a surgical practice that improved with experience, the same way any medical technique improves the more it's performed and the more its practitioners learn from what worked and what didn't. And this didn't stay locked in the ancient past either. The psychiatrist Edward Margetts documented trepanation still being practiced by the Gusii, also called the Kisia in Kenya, and his research on this was published around 1967. Practitioners use sharpened tools, similar in principle to what was used thousands of years earlier, to treat things like head trauma and severe headaches. Survivor count now stretches across an unbroken line from Neolithic Europe, through ancient Peru, into the 20th century on the other side of the planet. Different cultures, different centuries, no contact with each other, and they kept arriving at the same solution. So why did people actually do this? The honest answer is that it mostly wasn't about spirits or superstition, even though that's the explanation that gets repeated the most in casual retellings. The leading evidence points to real physical problems: skull fractures from combat or accidents, swelling that needed to be relieved, chronic pain, and in some cases, seizures. This was trauma medicine. People were opening the skull because something underneath it was already wrong. And they learned through trial and through watching who lived and who didn't that relieving pressure on the brain could save a life. That's not primitive thinking. That's the same basic logic behind a modern emergency craniotomy. So go back to that moment. You're lying there, awake, feeling stone against bone, trusting the person above you completely. Now picture the other side of it. The wound closes, the bone starts to smooth over. Weeks pass, then months. You get up. You walk, you hunt, you work, you live, maybe for years, maybe long enough to sit down next to a fire one night and tell someone exactly what it felt like. That person wasn't a victim of ignorance. They were living proof of a system of medicine that worked often enough, in enough different places, for people to keep trusting it for thousands of years. Ancient people were performing skull surgery and surviving it before a single word had ever been written down. If they could operate on the human brain without knowing what a virus was, what else did they understand about the human body that we've completely forgotten?